Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that's been slicing and dicing its way through Freddy vs. Jason like a couple of dream demons. I'm your host, Brian.
I'm Lightstick aficionado, Greg.
This chunk begins with some shocked-looking Springwood High School students and ends with Gib in a boiler room, apparently covering her nose after smelling a stinky fart.
Speaking of Gib, I noticed here that her hat has a logo for something called the Loose Moose. I Googled that, and apparently loose moose is slang for a woman or girl who's had too much sex. I mean, that kind of applies to Gib, I suppose, but there is a Loose Moose restaurant and pub in Ohio, so that checks out.
Outside Springwood High School, Gib has just told Lori that Blake was also killed last night. Kia says that the police are saying that Blake went crazy, killing Trey, then his dad, and then killing himself, but Kia says that's a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, she says they're blaming him like it's some kind of Columbine thing. This is a reference to April 20th, 1999, when two assholes murdered 12 students and one teacher in a school shooting.
I don't really see how there's a connection, though, because it's not like Blake went into the school and killed a bunch of people. Just the fact that he allegedly killed someone outside of school makes this a Columbine situation, simply because he's a high school student.
And an asshole? But yeah, you're right. I mean, it seems like kind of a ham-handed way to just get a real-world event in there to make this feel like it's actually happening or something.
Inside Springwood High School, Lori and Kia are walking down the hall when they're approached by some guy named Linderman. He clearly has a crush on Lori, offering his help should she need it during this difficult time. Kia pulls Linderman aside and tells him to bottle up his hormones because Lori doesn't have time for data dork.
Meanwhile, in another part of the hall, a guy who is dressed up like Jason Mewes is handing out invitations to a pumpkin patch party or something. This is Bill Freeberg.
Lori shows up and interrupts the passing out of pamphlets and tells Kia and Gib that she doesn't want to go to the party because she didn't get a lot of sleep last night. She starts to describe this nightmare she had about this terrible man wearing a brown hat, burned skin, and a glove of razor fingers. As Lori is getting ready to describe the nursery rhyme she heard, Mark from the psychiatric hospital suddenly shows up and finishes her thought. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Mark says that when they sing that, you know that Freddy is coming for you.
And I don't get what he means there. Are those little girls previous victims of Freddy that are trying to warn you to try to get away? Or is that Freddy using these little girls as just another way to creep you out before he shows up? Like, you know, that song means Freddy is coming, but is it to help you or is it him just being theatrical?
I don't know. I mean, these girls don't show up every single time Freddy shows up, right? I mean, I can't believe that every single victim has seen these girls jumping rope, because we certainly don't see it that many times during the course of a movie.
Yeah, good point. They'd be in every goddamn scene.
Well, off the top of my head, I know that the girls showed up for Nancy, right?
Yes.
And Lori.
So that's 2 out of...
No, that's not to say that it hasn't happened for other people in the movies. I'm just going off the top of my head. But
right, yeah, no, I mean, I'm with you. But I mean, I get the sense that was maybe something that was just a nice, creepy moment from the first movie that they're referencing here and putting a little too much weight on it.
Probably.
It was another thing. Nancy is walking down the sunlit street of Springwood, Ohio in that very first movie when she sees these little girls jumping rope and singing that, which was very ethereal and dreamlike, maybe alluding to the fact that the whole movie was a dream sequence.
Mark's little Nightmare on Elm Street recap is interrupted by Will, who, like Mark, has had no trouble marching right into this high school with little interference. Speaking of Columbine. And then Lori hilariously faints at the sight of her former 14-year-old lover.
I found Mark to be oddly hostile to Lori. And I'm not really sure why. Yeah, she's the reason Will wanted to escape, but Mark gladly helped his friend. And she has nothing to do with Mark's backstory. there's this whole thing about his brother dying or whatever and him being locked up in the psychiatric ward, but she didn't have anything to do with that. It was Will who was involved in, in the fact that Lori's mom died, and he got locked up for that. But I don't know why Mark is so angry at her.
I wonder if it's just his reaction to all of this shit going down again, that he's just, upset that it hasn't gone away, and that, he's been locked up for
he's just like stressed out.
Yeah, he's been locked up for 4 years and nothing has changed.
Fair enough. That's cool. Just then, Principal Bob Shea appears, and so Mark and Will take off. Lori is now safely asleep in the school's infirmary, while her friends Gib and Kia are sitting out in the waiting area.
I don't know if I ever got sick enough at school to visit the nurse, but do you even remember what our high school sick bay looked like?
I do, because of the time in gym class when we were playing floor hockey, and Trevor
Van Halen
accidentally tripped me so much that I flipped into the air and landed on my ankle sideways. That, unbeknownst to everyone, broke my ankle, and I was in the infirmary for a while with the nurse as she tried to reach one of my parents, but for whatever reason wasn't able to, and so I wound up walking home on a broken ankle from the bus stop that day. I don't know why we didn't think to try and get your mom to come pick us up or something.
I don't know, but I do remember walking back with you and thinking, hurry the fuck up. No, the only reason why I asked that is because this seems like a pretty elaborate sick bay. Now, we don't know how big Springwood High School is, and the high school that we went to was not particularly massive, but it's just pretty involved, and there's there's a stretcher and a separate room for patients to be taken care of, and there's a waiting area and a reception area.
It's pretty elaborate. I mean, I remember it being just kind of a room that had a gurney almost. I don't think it was even a full bed.
Even though Kia's got bills to pay, she's still flipping through a magazine about plastic surgery. It seems she's interested in getting a nose job. As Kia turns the pages of the magazine, the images get more and more graphic until she gets to a full-page ad for New Dream nails. They're hard as steel. The image of the hand with painted red fingernails quickly turns into Freddy's glove, which reaches out of the page, sticking 2 of the claws up Kia's nostrils. The image of the fashion model on the next page turns into Freddy. He says, "Got your nose!" and rips Kia's nose clear off in a pretty terrible CGI effect.
Oof, yeah, it was rough. Great idea. Very poorly executed.
But it's just a dream, Greg.
Oh. So even though Lori was already asleep, Freddy is now choosing other victims. He must be getting stronger. Mark and Will are hanging around the hallways of the school, passing a large banner that decries violence and harassment. Mark is starting to believe that he might not be crazy after all, and that his brother was not crazy, because Lori is describing things like Freddy and the sweater and the glove that Mark has been saying he saw years ago. Just then, the police show up, so Mark and Will cheese it out the door of the school. I'm hoping here that we get a cool chase, but no, we immediately cut to the public library where Mark is instead excitedly searching fruitlessly for any mention of Freddy Krueger in the library's microfiche files. There's just a lot of blacked out obituaries, and Mark takes notice of the fact that there's no mention of his brother dying from suicide in any of these news articles. It's a pretty big leap, but Mark pieces together a conspiracy here. He and the other kids were quarantined away in Weston Hills so they wouldn't infect other kids by talking about Freddy Krueger.
Even though that is a big kind of leap in logic, I do kind of like the idea that Weston Hills ended up being a quarantine facility to just kind of keep everyone that knew about Freddy away from the public, and just hope that by suppressing their dreams with these drugs, that the problem, Freddy, would just kind of disappear. The fact that Will figured that out is pretty unrealistic, but the overall idea I'm kind of on board with.
Yes, I agree. I think it could have been fleshed out in a better way, but it's a cool idea, and it works perfectly well with the idea of Freddy Krueger and dreaming and such.
There's then this really weird cut where it's a continuation of this conversation that Mark and Will are having, but now they're inside a van that's adorned with a sweet painting of a topless female warrior holding a spear and a battle axe battling a giant serpent.
And in fact, the serpent is scrawled across the front of the van in some cool scroll lettering.
Inside the van, Will and Mark continue their discussion bathed in sweet, sweet blacklight. Mark suggests that the reason Freddy hasn't killed Laurie is because he's not strong enough yet. He then reminds Will that it's our fear that gives Freddy his power, which is something that we're going to hear about 37 more times in this movie. Mark is then concerned that because everyone has heard, the two of them talking about Freddy, like in the hallways of the high school, that people are going to start having nightmares about Freddy and everyone's going to start dying again.
Yeah, this kid really should be a detective because he's putting a lot of stuff together and figuring out the whole plot of this movie.
Will closes off their conversation by saying that he just wants to find Laurie. I don't know what his plan is after he finds her, but he wants to find her. So Mark gives him until dawn to find Laurie. So he hands over the keys to the van, which we learn belong to Mark's brother.
We then transition to a cornfield where the kids are having a gigantic rave. This is the party that Freeberg was handing out invitations for earlier. Linderman toodles up on his cute little scooter, but is immediately bullied and hazed by the school jocks. Not far away, a menacing hand reaches down and wrenches loose a rusty pipe from some farm equipment. Despite the trauma of the last 24 hours and not wanting to go to the party initially, Laurie is now sitting on the hood of a car, bopping to the music completely by herself.
Linderman then approaches Laurie and asks if he can get her a drink, but before she can answer, Kia shows up and immediately starts teasing Linderman for being a dork. But Linderman drops her like a bad habit with a fantastic rebuttal. He says that Kia only makes fun of him because she hates herself, and making fun of others makes her feel better. And this sends Kia crawling back into a hole.
Yeah, it was pretty great. I like that he stood up for himself here. And there's a nice thematic consistency with the scene we saw moments ago of her wanting cosmetic surgery because she's unhappy with her appearance. And now he accurately points out that she finds fault with others because she has some sort of self-loathing going on.
Elsewhere at the party, while waiting in line for the keg, one girl suggests to the dude behind her that Blake killed himself out of grief for his friend Trey's death, but the dude says he heard that some guy named Kruger killed them both. Freeberg, the J. Muse-looking dude, is standing behind the other dude in the beer line and says that he heard Kruger used to live in town and that he gutted Trey like a turkey. Gibb, unfortunately, hears this and storms off.
I do like that word is now starting to spread. The Freddy infection is making its way to the other kids and stuff, so Mark's fears were justified. But one thing about this moment bothers me. Is it just me, or are none of the light sticks that we see at this rave actually illuminated? I almost feel like they shot this day for night, and so they didn't crack the light sticks to make them glow because they wouldn't show up in the daylight anyway. But they just don't look, they look like they're unilluminated.
Well, you know why that is. Dream demons.
I forgot about the dream demons. The other thing about light sticks that cracks me up is I recently watched Rambo 3, which came out in 1988, and they make a big deal about him having this blue light stick and how the Mujahideen fighters don't understand what that is. And like, what does it do? It glows blue. I mean, I was playing with light sticks on the beach when I was like 4 years old, so it's not like they were some newfangled technology.
Will and Laurie are finally reunited at the party, and Laurie wonders where he's been the last 4 years. He says that he's been writing her tons of letters, but Laurie never got them, so the doctors at the Weston Hills facility clearly never mailed them. Poor Linderman, meanwhile, is crushed when he sees this reunion going on with Laurie. Kia picks up on this and now seems to be dangerously in love with Linderman because she asks him to dance.
Gibb, who is now both angry and drunk, wanders into the corn and hallucinates or dreams seeing Trey lurking among the corn rows. he bellows for her to follow him, and she staggers further into the corn. I can't fully understand what we're seeing here. It almost looks like he's holding his head in place with his own arm, but nothing happened with his head. He was folded in half. So it was a weird... It was, it was meant to be creepy and, evocative of him being dead, but I wasn't sure exactly how.
You're right. It's almost like he's someone you would expect to see like in the waiting room in Beetlejuice, where there's this weird, like disassociated, like anatomy going on.
Bingo.
But it,
yeah.
like you said, it doesn't track to anything that we saw before. Like if this was Blake's dad holding his head or something, then that makes sense. But in this case, it doesn't. Like he should have been, folded in half and walking really funny or something like that. But
I wonder if they forgot that it was Blake's dad who got beheaded, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll have him hold his head," not realizing that was a different character.
Or they couldn't figure out how to do the effect of someone bent in half walking around, so they're like, just have him hold his head.
Or they had to return the rollaway bed to the rental agency, and they couldn't get it for this shot. Gib finally reaches the grain silos of this corn farm and wanders inside. Almost immediately, she sees Freddy's shadow approaching and backs up against a metal wall. Freddy's face then pushes through from the other side, almost like that scene in the first Nightmare on Elm Street where Freddy looms out of the wall over Nancy. We cut to Gib back in the real world. She's actually passed out on the ground in this field, as a freaky LED-wearing guy from the rave, who we noticed seeing her leaving earlier, has now followed her. He looks around to make sure nobody's watching.
This is when we cut back to the silo/boiler room to see the frightened Gib making her way through the labyrinth, covering her face with her baseball cap. And that's where this segment ends.
Sadly, we have no deaths this episode.
If you'd like to hear us play a spirited game of Got Your Nose, tune in next week to another episode of You're All Doomed.